I have the pleasure of introducing Todd Connor. Todd has worn many hats in life and throughout has pursued passion projects to improve people's lives. A Navy veteran and an entrepreneur, Todd started Bunker Labs in 2014 to help military veterans start and grow businesses. And over the next decade, he grew Bunker Labs to 40 chapters across the United States, including one here in Bozeman, Montana, serving over 1,200 military veterans a year. Todd is an executive in residence at the University of Chicago on faculty with the George W. Bush Institute and is the author of Third Shift Entrepreneur. Most relevant to today's conversation, he's co-founder of Veterans for All Voters, an organization he co-founded 3 years ago to reform and repair our political infrastructure. It's something he and I share a deep passion for. Please join me in welcoming Todd.
Fist bump. All right. Who's excited to talk about politics? I'm the only thing standing in between you and a break. And so I want you to know that that's coming. And I'm going to attempt to do the impossible, which is talk about our broken political system without talking about politics. And I'm going to do it. And I'm going to start with some very bad news, and I don't think this news will surprise you. But then I'm going to hopefully sketch out for you a very hopeful opportunity that we have as a state here in Montana and then as a country to reclaim our political system and make it work again for Eva and her cohort. So first, I have some very shocking news. I don't think our political system's working. I know. We heard last night from the governor, who was an early investor in Bunker Labs in our efforts to help veteran entrepreneurs in this state, talk about the comity in the state capitol here in Montana. And as I travel around the country, what you hear is the closer you get to people, the more local you get, the more it does work. And the further you get away, the less it does. So we know that the United States Congress doesn't seem to be functional. The question is, have we done a diagnostic to figure out why? And I want to move beyond emotion to present to you a very broken marketplace and some leadership, thought leadership that isn't original to me, but thought leadership that gripped me to such an extent that, and I think I heard a theme on this from Chris, when something compels you so deeply, you cannot help but pursue it as an answer towards truth. And I had a deep awakening moment 3 years ago when I was trying to figure out what's the answer besides screaming and throwing money around and hearing for the 6th election cycle in a row that this is the most important election cycle of our lives. It got old to me, and I was looking for, what's a smart person's answer to what's broken? So our political system is broken. The question is why? Congress has a 95% re-election rate. 95% of members who seek re-election are re-elected. And yet Congress has a 15% approval rating. So if you were an investor, you'd be looking at this marketplace, which is an unregulated duopoly. And the problem with duopolies and monopolies, and the reason that we regulate them, is because they can extract rents from consumers without delivering a valid product. And the political industrial complex this year is going to spend $12 billion, keeping all of us in a state of outrage because nothing fuels campaign giving like outrage. And we're not going to give out of a shared set of loves, which is what a real community is, which is the community that's assembled here. It's a false community of a shared set of hatred. And when you look at an industry that's going to pump $12 billion into ensuring an outcome that none of us are excited about, you have to question what's going on here. Michael Porter, the Harvard Business School professor, the architect of Porter's Five Forces, did a dive on this, wrote a book along with Catherine Gale called The Politics Industry, and basically said, look, the problem's kind of simple. It's a duopoly, it's unregulated, and duopolies will just kind of continue on unless abated in some other way. And if you want to get out of that situation, you can do a few things. One is you can regulate the duopoly, which is unlikely to happen, because we're asking the regulators to, in that case, regulate themselves. Or you can introduce reforms that bring in competition and reform. So that's what's broken. Congress has a 15% approval rating, a 95% re-election rate, $12 billion spent to keep us in a state of heightened anxiety, and a solution that doesn't appear to be in sight. Let me talk about Alaska. The one state in the country that has figured out how to do something different is Alaska. In 2020, they passed a citizen referendum in spite of opposition from both Republicans and Democrats and entrenched power interests, in which Alaska voters said the following: we want to get rid of partisan primaries. We want to enact a different election model that puts everyone, Republicans and Democrats and independents, on one ballot in a primary, and then a general election in which we're not forced to choose between a lesser of two evils, but we actually get to see 4 choices and then rank those options in the order in which we like them. This simple change does a few things. Number one, importantly, it opened up elections to registered independents. The most egregious act of voter suppression in this country today has nothing to do with election security or ballot access for registered voters. It has to do with the fact that registered independents, which 59% of the military community identifies as, and the majority of voters in many states across the country, and a plurality of voters in every state in the country. The majority is, in fact, the registered independent. And they are either forced to choose and opt into a partisan primary or game it because they know that they live in a supermajority state, so Democrats jump over and vote in Republican primaries and vice versa, or they're excluded. So the system in Alaska opened up for registered independents, and then it put 4 people on the ballot in the general election, and here's what the voters of Alaska elected last cycle: a conservative Republican governor, a moderate Republican senator, Lisa Murkowski, and a moderate House member, a Democrat, Mary Peltola. What they also saw was a 30% increase in voters that turned out in the primary, twice as many female candidates running as in the I believe twice as many as in the previous cycle. And they saw, this is the most powerful thing. Once it happened, an immediate set of collaborations occurred between members willing to work together. They established a bipartisan governing coalition. You saw Republicans endorsing Democrats and vice versa. And the common theme amongst those folks was who is here to be serious and who is here to be performative. And the performative politicians were sidelined. Those that were just interested in cable news talking points were waylaid. And those that were there to do the people's work, focus on Alaska, work together, irrespective of party identity. So you can look at Alaska and say, that's an anomaly. And it's Alaska, and it's weird, and it's maybe not surprising to me that, the state furthest from Washington, D.C. actually took the most bold action to upend D.C. But here's the opportunity. Montana has a ballot initiative that Lauren is leading, and she alluded to, in which Montanans can opt in for a similar election model, the Alaska model. And one state is an anomaly, but 2 states is a movement. And the thing about movements, whether it's marriage equality, cannabis, women's suffrage, is that it seems impossible until it seems inevitable. And it happens in a place where it's least expected, and people, citizens, us, begin to sort of envision a dream for ourselves that if a state like Montana can have it, why can't we? And so I come to you almost with a love letter to say the future of the United States might very well depend on whether or not we get election reform as a movement, and the answer to whether or not this becomes a movement or whether this remains a kind of anomaly in Alaska is whether or not Montana comes next. So I'm not an expert in movement making, but I do want to tell you that you stand on the shoulders of some giants in this state. People like Senator Thomas Walsh. I was doing some research and reading about the history of Montana, because I wonder, what is it about Montana? What is it about a gathering like this? And I operate with the belief that we are have so much more in common than we have that divides us. But we have a $12 billion industry that needs us divided. And I refuse to believe that that is true. I think we work in service of the vast majority of Americans who are decent, kind, and even Pew Research suggests the vast majority of Americans, 70%, agree on tough issues like gun control, the border, immigration policy, reproductive rights. We as Americans have so much more in common. We cannot let a $12 billion industry tell us otherwise. But it's us versus that industry, and this is the moment that's going to matter. You have heroes that come out of the state, people like Senator Thomas Walsh, who served in the 20s as a freshman junior senator from the state of Montana and initiated the Teapot Dome scandal, spending 2 years calling out corruption and ultimately taking down the Secretary of the Interior the most biggest scandal up until Watergate. You have people like Senator James Murray, who served the state in the 30s and 40s, who was fanatical about the genocide taking place in Germany before we had entered the war, even though only 1/3 of 1% of residents of the state of Montana were Jewish at the time. You have people like Burton Wheeler, who tackled corruption inside the Justice Department, took down a crooked attorney general of his own party, and then continued to call out FDR on court packing, which he knew was an undemocratic practice. Huey Long called him the most courageous politician he'd ever known. He went on to have a movie made after him, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, predicated loosely on the moral character of Senator Burton Wheeler, and went on to run as a running mate with another great reform crusader, then governor of Wisconsin, Robert Fighting Bob La Follette. You have people like Jeanette Rankin, the first female member of Congress, elected into office 4 years before the 19th Amendment was the law of the land, and women had the full right to vote. And what's most interesting about Jeanette Rankin, of the many things, but she went in her first term and was one of 50 representatives to vote against entering World War I because she was a pacifist and a woman of character. It cost her re-election. She wouldn't be elected back into the House for a second term until nearly 30 years later, when she did win a second term on the heels of World War II. And when Pearl Harbor was bombed and the vote to war went to the Congress, she again voted her conscience, the only member to vote against entering World War II, as a pacifist, and then promptly again lost her own re-election. How refreshing to have a politician willing to lose the re-election to do what is in the spirit of their own conscience. And Montana is full of people like these. Eloise Cobell, many of you will know, who, having grown up as one of 8 children in the Blackfeet Nation, helped launch the Blackfeet National Bank in Browning, the first tribally owned bank in the United States, helping small business owners find their footing and their financial literacy. Spent 15 years in a lawsuit with the federal government over rightful claims of dollars stolen from her people, and landed a $3.4 billion settlement, the largest class action settlement ever to exist in the United States up until that point. So this is your legacy, Montana. These are the people that were heroes of the day, and I invite you to see yourself in a historical moment in which the people that are going to save us from ourselves are not the people that we see on TV. They are not the people in Washington, D.C., who just operate predictably in a system that incentivizes them to do all the things they do. No one's acting irrationally. Everyone's doing what helps them. And the net result for us is dysfunction. And it's not some ethereal dysfunction. If the United States experiment in self-government fails us now, what will we say then about what could have been possible now? So I invite you to act with the urgency now as if you had lost it later. And you can do that by getting really involved with everything that Lauren and the team are advancing here in Montana. I wouldn't be in Bozeman if I didn't think Montana could save America, and America could save the world. Thank you.